Greetings and welcome. We are now in Senior AP English. And our objective for the hour is to analyze, if not exegete, one of the most single important essays in the history of essay writing, for reasons that I'll get into. Swift's classic Modest Proposal. One of the interesting things that I'll often say to students who are bound for the university, where they're going to have to take a 10-10-10-20 class, as you obviously will not, is that one of the few texts that I can absolutely guarantee that most high school students will read again at the university level. By the way, that's not true for most of what I'm teaching to you. It's not. Unless you take very specialized classes, you probably will not have to ever read again Plato or Machiavelli or Milton, and the list goes on. But I can almost always predict that somebody's going to throw Modest Proposal at you when you are a university undergraduate student. Why is that the case? I'll try and finish my lecture with that observation as to why I think that's the case. I think I'll set you up by saying it this way, though. Swift's Modest Proposal still has a disturbing, underline the word, tendency to work, for reasons that I hope I can articulate here in the next few minutes. First of all, it's very difficult to appreciate this essay if you don't have some sense of context, historical context. If you do have a sense of historical context in regards to what this essay is about, then all of a sudden this essay starts to open up. Secondly, it's hypercritical that you understand that Swift is writing satire. And since we ourselves are going to use Modest Proposal as a model to write our own satiric essay, then it's critical that we understand just exactly what that means when we say Swift writes satire. Okay? So I want to kind of do a dance of two different movements here with you. The first is to talk about the context of this essay, and then the second is to talk about what we mean when we talk about satire. Like, dude, what is up with this thing called satire, and how is that different from other kinds of essay writing that Swift could have employed in terms of form? Then finally, we'll look at the specific essay itself and the somewhat disturbing suggestions of the essay, and then we'll finish with maybe an observation as to why it is this essay continues to be read and continues to disturb the intellect of a good number of university students. Let's begin with context. England and Ireland have never gotten on. We should just start there. Historically speaking, there has never been the best of relationships between the two. Lots and lots of tension. At a key, pivotal moment in Irish history, England begins to exert its force, its influence. Now, England, of course, had dominated Ireland for many years, through a series of battles and the like. England decides to do the really unthinkable. They raise taxes on a group of people in Ireland that are already really, really poor. And then the terrible, what's called Irish potato famine happens. Now, if you eat potatoes at all, you eat them because of Ireland. Ireland, in many ways, invents this product, and it's a product that can be easily, quickly grown in Ireland, and it's a way to sustain or keep alive the poorest of the poor, and I do mean that. Often it's all they will eat. That's all they got to eat. The famous potato famine, what happens is that the potato crops all start dying. And in the moment that this happens, quite literally, you got large numbers of people then who have nothing to eat. It's at that moment that England decides to raise taxes. The Parliament decides to raise taxes on these people. Swift takes a journey up into Ireland, where he sees the horrific conditions. I mean, they're bad. We, for example, have stories that come out of the major cities of Ireland, like, for example, Dublin, where we are told that very young children, parents are giving away their very, very young daughters, 5- and 6-year-old little girls, to prostitution so they can get a penny. And of course, in the process of that happening, the young child will be killed right away. This is happening in mass, these kinds of tragedies. Parents are abandoning their children because they can't feed them. And we're talking about tens of thousands of these children. Swift goes up there and he cannot believe it. He is outraged. He is outraged. He comes back to England to discover in England, every day in the London Times, someone has written an essay, what we would call formal essay, about how terrible it is in Ireland. Terrible. In fact, everyone in England says the same thing. Oh, yes, it's terrible, terrible. Right? Swift comes back and he says, I'm going to have to find another way to wake up these people. The way he does it is to publish his modest proposal. It is an outrage on almost every count. It is an outrage. When it's published, people are like, what in heaven's name have you said, and how dare you say it? There are people who say he should be in prison. There are people who say he should be executed for what he has said in this essay. Now let's point out something. Why the response by the reader towards Swift? Well, the answer is simple. It's the S word. It's satire. Swift is the great manipulator of rhetoric in the satiric voice. He comes from a long, long tradition that takes itself all the way back to the great Roman orator Juvenal. And he has a sense of how Chaucer was able to use satire. Now he's going to employ it. But he's going to employ it in a way no one in the history of rhetoric had ever used it before. How does he do it? Well, he sits down to write an essay in which he is going to use a certain personae. Now that's an important word for your notes. Personae. It's of course the ancient Greek word that we met when we were studying Aristotle's Poetics and of course Sophoclean drama. Personae, that is to say, a certain kind of mask, if you will. Voice is maybe another way to say it. The voice that Swift will employ is the voice of the accountant. That's important that you understand this. The voice of the accountant. Now, I don't know if you know any accountants, and I don't know if, as you get ready to go to university, you know of anyone who says, I'm going to major in accounting. And we don't want to insult at all when we say that what we mean when we say the voice of an accountant is, he uses a voice which is completely impersonal. All he cares about is the facts, the statistics. And he will take then this voice throughout the entire essay. Okay? The essay is of 3 parts. Part 1, he will set up his readers by saying it gets dark at night. By saying the bloody obvious. I've just returned from Ireland and everything is really bad. He even goes so far as to say, if somebody could figure out a solution to all of the homeless kids in Ireland, that person would deserve a huge monument in downtown London. Part 2, he provides his proposal to the problem. So notice how he sets up this piece of satire. First, he says, there's a problem. Second, he says, I have a solution. And he presents his solution. His solution, of course, is radical. The title of the essay is Modest, or a very humble, or a very undersaid or underspoken proposal. But of course, it's the most radical imagined proposal in the history of the English language. Even today, you cannot find a more radical proposal than the one that Swift will offer. Part 3. At the end of the essay, he will say, well, there it is. If somebody has a better proposal than mine, I'd be more than happy to hear it. There it is. And he finishes. At no point in the essay, are you ready for this? This is huge for the one you'll be writing. At no point in the essay does he ever say, just kidding, just kidding. This is satire, I'm just messing with you, just messing. Never says that, okay? That's crucial to understanding satire, okay? Now, many years ago, we had a newspaper at Whirlin High. Maybe the story I'm about to relate is the reason as to why we no longer have it. And I was affiliated with that newspaper, at least tangentially, as being the advisor. And we had grown in our class to a substantial size that we had multiple classes that produced all of our journalism projects. One of them was this newspaper that we called the Worland High School Scream. And of course, administration had been kind of skeptical and concerned about this project from the get-go because they were worried about what some student might put in the newspaper, which was distributed to the tune of about 3,000 copies every week in Worland. And there was a student that I had, and she had been studying with me satire and Swift and the like. And she came to me and she said, I think I have an idea for an essay for our paper. And I said, oh, really? What is it? And she said, well, I'm kind of sick. We were in the spring. I'm kind of sick of all this public display of affection that's now happening in the halls. Guys are walking with their girls. Girls are walking with their guys. It literally looks like you got to take out a room next to the locker because they're climbing all over each other, exchanging fluids and the like, you see. And I'm just sick of it. She said, I've had enough of it, and so I'm going to write an essay about it. And I was like, oh, okay. Well, somehow or another, I'm not exactly free to say how, this essay ends up making its way into the Scream newspaper and published before I ever actually saw it. Subterfuge or complicity, I'll take the fifth. But anyway, this essay was brilliantly crafted. It followed the exact same formula that I just outlined with Modest Proposal. She began by saying, Worland High School has a serious problem in the late spring. As the sun comes out and everyone starts to tan and get all excited, and as Tennyson says, in the spring, a young man's fancy to turn to love, I'm beginning, she said, to recognize large amounts of couples at Worland High School who have mistaken Worland High School for a Holiday Inn. And to that degree, I think we got a serious problem with public displays of affection. Allow me, she said, to offer a solution to the obvious problem of all of these people who are standing in the middle of the halls doing all kinds of, well, things some of us just do not want to see. She said, I believe in love, and I want to celebrate love. Let's build a special room at Worland High School. She then goes into major detail about what this room is going to look like. There will, of course, be a drain in the corner that will allow for the room to be cleaned before the next visitors. She goes into detail about what's important in regards to the other things that are in the room to aid in the activities, and on and on and on. And this thing gets published. The administration, who obviously is concerned about, the community's response, quickly came to me, and I said two things. Oh, that's interesting. Wonder how that got in there. And secondly, are you familiar with the concept satire? That is to say one thing means something else. Okay? Now, it's one thing to say it's a terrible thing to starve the children of Ireland with this unbelievable, taxation on them, et cetera, et cetera. That's one thing. Write 5 paragraphs about why that's the case. That's kind of the essays that we call academic essays. Okay. It's another thing entirely to say, there's 120,000 children nobody wants in Ireland. We got to figure out what we're going to do with those kids every year. I have a plan. Let's eat them. We'll eat them. We'll eat them. This will make complete sense in every way. Then Swift will go through a series of observations about why this plan works on every count. It works. Let's listen to the opening lines of this essay and watch the genius. And I want to ask you to pay close attention to where Swift gets his idea. Ben Franklin was not pleased. Remember your dates, right? Remember your dates, okay? Let's take a look and listen here for just a few seconds. Follow along. We'll listen to the great voice, satiric voice of Swift. Okay?
Proposal for preventing the children of poor people in Ireland from being a burden to their parents or country and for making them beneficial to the public. Jonathan Swift.
Right,
In a
subtitle.
modest proposal, Jonathan Swift suggests an unorthodox solution to the problem of desperate poverty in 18th century Ireland. As you read, think about the real message of his satirical essay.
It is a melancholy object to those who walk through this great town or travel in the country, when they see the streets, the roads, and cabin doors crowded with beggars of the female sex, followed by 3, 4, or 6 children, all in rags and importuning every passenger for an alms. These mothers, instead of being able to work for their honest livelihood, are forced to employ all their time in strolling to beg sustenance for their helpless infants who, as they grow up, either turn thieves for want of work or leave their dear native country to fight for the Pretender in Spain or sell themselves to the Barbados. I think it is agreed by all parties that this prodigious number of children in the arms or on the backs or at the heels of their mothers, and frequently of their fathers, is in the present deplorable state of the kingdom a very great additional grievance, and therefore whoever could find out a fair, cheap, and easy method of making these children sound, useful members of the Commonwealth would deserve so well of the public as to have his statue set up for a preserver of the nation. But my intention is very far from being confined to provide only for the children of professed beggars. It is of a much greater extent, and shall take in the whole number of infants at a certain age, who are born of parents, in effect, as little able to support them as those who demand our charity in the streets. As to my own part, having turned my thoughts for many years upon this important subject, and maturely weighed the several schemes of other projectors, I have always found them grossly mistaken in their computation. It is true, a child just dropped from its dam may be supported by her milk for a solar year, with little other nourishment, at most not above the value of 2 shillings, which the mother may certainly get, or the value in scraps, by her lawful occupation of begging. And it is exactly at 1 year old that I propose to provide for them in such a manner as, instead of being a charge upon their parents or the parish, or wanting food and raiment for the rest of their lives, they shall, on the contrary, contribute to the feeding and partly to the clothing of many thousands. There is likewise another great advantage in my scheme, that it will prevent those voluntary abortions and that horrid practice of women murdering their bastard children, alas, too frequent among us, sacrificing the poor innocent babes, I doubt, more to avoid the expense than the shame, which would move tears and pity in the most savage and inhuman breast. The number of souls in this kingdom being usually reckoned 1.5 million, of these I calculate there may be about 200,000 couple whose wives are breeders, from which number I subtract 30,000 couples who are able to maintain their own children, although I apprehend there cannot be so many under the present distresses of the kingdom. But this being granted, there will remain 170,000 breeders. I again subtract 50,000 for those women who miscarry, or whose children die by accident or disease within the year. There only remain 120,000 children of poor parents annually born. The question, therefore, is how this number shall be reared and provided for, which, as I have already said, under the present situation of affairs, is utterly impossible by all the methods hitherto proposed. For we can neither employ them in handicraft or agriculture, we neither build houses, I mean in the country, nor cultivate land. They can very seldom pick up a livelihood by stealing till they arrive at 6 years old, except where they are of towardly parts. Although I confess they learn the rudiments much earlier, during which time they can, however, be looked upon only as probationers. As I have been informed by a principal gentleman in the county of Cavan, who protested to me that he never knew above 1 or 2 instances under the age of 6, even in a part of the kingdom so renowned for the quickest proficiency in that art. I am assured by our merchants that a boy or girl before 12 years old is no saleable commodity. And even when they come to this age, they will not yield above £3, or £3.50 a crown at most on the exchange, which cannot turn to account either to the parents or the kingdom, the charge of nutriment and rags having been at least 4 times that value. I shall now, therefore, humbly propose my own thoughts, which I hope will not be liable to the least objection. I have been assured by a very knowing American of my acquaintance in London that a young, healthy child, well nursed, is at a year old a most delicious, nourishing, and wholesome food, whether stewed, roasted, baked, or boiled. And I make no doubt that it will equally serve in a fricassee or a ragout. I do therefore humbly offer it to public consideration that of the 120,000 children already computed, 20,000 may be reserved for breed, whereof only 1/4 part to be males, which is more than we allow to sheep, black cattle, or swine. And my reason is that these children are seldom the fruits of marriage, a circumstance not much regarded by our savages. Therefore, 1 male will be sufficient to serve 4 females. That the remaining 100,000 may at a year old be offered in sale to the persons of quality and fortune through the kingdom, always advising the mother to let them suck plentifully in the last month, so as to render them plump and fat for a good table. A child will make 2 dishes at an entertainment for friends, and when the family dines alone, the fore or hind quarter will make a reasonable dish, and seasoned with a little pepper or salt will be very good boiled on the 4th day, especially in winter. I have reckoned upon a medium that a child just born will weigh 12 pounds, and in a solar year, if tolerably nursed, increaseth to 28 pounds. I grant this food will be somewhat dear, and therefore very proper for landlords, who, as they have already devoured most of the parents, seem to have the best title to the children. Infant's flesh will be in season throughout the year, but more plentiful in March and a little before and after. For we are told by a grave author, an eminent French physician, that fish being a prolific diet, there are more children born in Roman Catholic countries about 9 months after Lent than at any other season. Therefore, reckoning a year after Lent, the markets will be more glutted than usual, because the number of popish infants is at least 3 to 1 in this kingdom, and therefore it will have one other collateral advantage by lessening the number of papists among us. I have already computed the charge of nursing a beggar's child, in which list I reckon all cottagers, laborers, and 4/5 of the farmers.
And on and on and on he goes, right? For those of you that have studied this essay closely, it's just brutal. Dude, I mean, think about it. It's not only going to be a way to take care of 120,000 kids nobody wants, but it allows as well for an import-export. The Americans, he will say, they've been doing this for years. They've been eating their own kids over there. And we'll be able to send our kids over there. They'll love it over there. Besides that, think of all the things you can do with the child's body. Not only do you eat it, you're able to use the skin. What were you going to say, Mr. Schreiber?
Who doesn't need boots?
Yeah, you're going to be able to make footwear. Oh, yes, designer gloves made by the finest child's skin, and on. You know, his arguments are provocative. Mothers and fathers will take good care of their children now. They won't abuse them because they know if they take good care of them, they'll get more money for them on the open market when it comes time for them to sell them at 1 year old. And on and on.
So at what point did everybody figure out that, hey, just kidding?
Well, let's say it this way. And now I'm going to disturb you a little more as we now end our lecture. You do realize the whole proposal works. In every way, it works. You have 120,000 kids every year nobody wants. Everybody agrees with that statistic. It's probably a little more than that, but everybody agrees with that number. Now you don't have 120,000 starving children. You have a bunch of parents who don't take care of their children and abuse them in any number of ways. Now all of a sudden they'll begin to because they're going to be able to make bank. You have an import-export business where large numbers of people are able to make all kinds of money, and hurrah, you got to have somebody, as Mr. Schreiber points out, to actually make the shoes once you fillet the children. It works on every count, guys. It totally solves the problem. In every way, it totally solves the problem. Right, Mr. Peterson says, but there's one problem with the solution. One problem with the proposal. What is it? What is wrong with this proposal?
The kids might have diseases.
No, that's not.
That is
Because that's,
like mad.
because that's simple. It's just like with livestock. If you got livestock that's infested, you just kill it. You destroy it. That's not a problem. Besides that, either way, there's 120,000 kids nobody wants. Now that's one less kid you got to worry about feeding.
Don't you get like the shakes though if you eat human flesh? Like, don't they get like really shaky and stuff?
You're killing babies.
As Mr. Swift points out, the Americans have been doing this for a long time over in the colonies. Remember our dates here. 1776 will be Tom Jefferson's "We hold this truth to be self-evident, all men are created equal." There is an ongoing dilemma among the intelligentsia in Europe, especially in England, that the guys, Washington, Franklin, Jefferson, all those guys over there in the colonies are not actually intellectuals at all. You know, they're Americans. They're crazy people. They go out with their guns every morning and they kill things with their firearms to hunt, to kill things. They're barbarians, which is why when Franklin makes his journey to Paris and to England, and Jefferson the same, lots and lots of the intelligence of England are kind of stunned. Whoa, you speak multiple languages? You read? You write? Yeah, because there had been this idea disseminated that the American colonialists, they're a bunch of nut jobs over there anyway. Back to the question though, what's wrong with the proposal? It works on every count. It disturbs sometimes my students to say, crap, you're right. It does work on every count. There is not one flaw at all in his proposal in terms of its efficiency to answer the question, what are you going to do with 120,000 kids every year nobody wants?
Wait, what happens if you eat them all and then won't?
Well, that's even suggested in the essay itself. This is awesome. We'll begin to breed more. In fact, men and women will begin to have more children, not less children. Right. This is going to be awesome.
He's not killing all of them. He saves
You're
some
right.
to breed them.
That's right. This becomes a...
He actually calls them breeders.
Right. That's right. I mean, this is awesome on every count. Wait a minute. Kennedy is now going to offer an observation. I'm sorry, say it a little bit louder.
You can't just eat kids.
You can't just eat kids.
They look kind of like a turkey.
You can't just eat kids. Of course.
If you slice it right and put on a nice piece of bread.
Dude, I'm not the one that said it, and Swift isn't the one that said it. Kennedy's the one that said it. What's wrong with this proposal? In a line, it is effective, it is efficient, it's not moral. That's right. Let's put it in our notes. What's wrong with this proposal is that it is immoral. Good heavens, we don't eat children. What is wrong with you? But notice in this essay, and this is the brilliance of Swift, notice in this essay, he never has to ask the real question. What's more immoral? Raping a little 5-year-old girl on the streets of Dublin? Or eating her when she's 1? When she has no clue what's going on then. At 5, at 6, at 7. You've destroyed a young person then. Which is more immoral? To eat them when they're newborns, or to not provide for them as they grow up? Which is more immoral? To raise taxes on them so that more of them starve? Which is more immoral? That question never has to get asked. Swift himself darkly, satirically says, I'd offer up my own child, but alas, she's too old and past the age when you could properly eat her. That's how he finishes this essay. Now, to finish, why do you think this essay is so popular still? If you want to Google this, you can. Last year, 2012, statistics estimate in the United States 1 million homeless kids. Last night in our nation, last night alone, over 100,000 children under the age of 10 slept on the streets of a city in this country. That's in this country. We're not talking about the millions of homeless kids, for example, who sleep on the garbage dumps outside of Rio in Brazil, or any number of other places in China and elsewhere. What are you going to do with all of those millions of kids nobody wants. Now let's go ahead and say this for our notes. This is a disturbing moment in AP English because we so regularly, right, we deal with just ideas, right? Theodicies and this kind of foolishness. Every once in a while, we butt up against some real life question, and I just asked it. You're all very bright people, destined to have what we said in our Bacon lecture, some money and some power. What can you do with that question of all those kids? I mean, really, dude, you didn't get born under some bridge, right, in Detroit or Atlanta, or the list goes on in the United States, right? You were raised in a home where you were given stuff so that you could be here right now listening to a lecture. Notice it's an intellectual enterprise right up until I asked the question, dude, what do you do with 1 million kids last year? And that's a conservative figure. Arguments are 1 in every 50 kids in America are homeless. What do you do with a stat like that? Like, I mean, really? What am I supposed to do? Because feeling bad for them clearly doesn't change one thing about them, correct?
They're still
I mean, yeah, they're still homeless. Going up and throwing them a few dollars or even a few $1,000s, really? That's going to solve their problem? You know, we have a sense. You know, the programs are in place, and yet the kids are still homeless. What about this? Let's just eat them. We could eat them. No, this solves all of our problems. The only thing we have to do is to get over this little moral problem Kennedy has about eating children. But it does beg the obvious question, which is more immoral, to eat them when they're 1 and they have no clue what's going on, or to let them grow up in total poverty, and then turn around when they're 19 and say to them, get a job, you punk. What do you do? Now, this is a disturbing question, and it leads, I think it does. I think this is why this essay keeps getting read on university campuses, because university students, by and large, want to have a soul. They don't just want to learn stuff and get degrees, right? So when they drive into the inner city and they see that terrible situation, the obvious question is, what do you do to make it better? What can you do to solve the problem of poverty? We're talking in the United States. But of course, we could expand the question to ask, what are you going to do with the poverty all over the world? What do you do with all those kids nobody wants? Swift says eat them. He says it's the humane thing to do before they're 1. Most readers will say, how dare you? But Swift seems to ask back, really? You don't want to eat them? What do you want to do with them? Well, I want to pretend like they don't exist. It's a whole lot easier to live without the knowledge of that stat I just shared. 1 in 45 to 50 kids are homeless. Crap. Now that you've told me that, I get to know that. I don't get to unlearn that. I don't get to forget that. Now what? Thanks a lot. And yet it seems that this is exactly where Swift wants you to be. Finally, you have a project now. You get to pick up now a little practice run at this. Let me make some suggestions to you. 1, decide what really torques you off. Some project, some political issue, whatever that is. Of course, my student, it was all that PDA happening in the halls of Royal and High. 2, you're going to write the exact opposite in regards to the problem. Instead of Swift talking about how terrible it is, let's try and find some government program about 120,000 kids nobody wants. He says, let's eat them. It's intentionally radical.
which is the last thing.
The last thing. So you're writing, and that's a nice way for Miss Eve to say it. You're writing about the last thing. I mean, obviously my student was not suggesting that to solve the problem of PDA, we're going to create a room at Worland High School where everyone can go and do their thing, right? That was not her point. Her point was for students to read it and go, yeah, she's probably right. The PDA thing's got to stop. It's kind of obnoxious. That was her intention. Now let's point out, when you write satire, you run a gamble. The gamble is you might be taken seriously. The other gamble is that you might offend, right? And they just don't get it. Okay? Either way, it's a gamble. And yet, the reason for writing satire is to kind of wake up the reader. The consciousness of the reader is just a little bit kind of lulled. Yeah, it's really bad, all these people in Ireland. And you kind of wake them up with the, let's eat them. Whoa, whoa, whoa. And all of a sudden it becomes something that leads people to decide to act. So what you want to do is you want to start with a question. what am I kind of torqued off about? What kind of bugs me? And then what's a radical satiric way for me to talk about that? Now, key, put it in your notes. At no point do you ever say this is